Blood is supposedly thicker than water, but in the Davies family, social status was the only currency that mattered. Chloe was marrying a decorated Navy SEAL, and their parents couldn't wait to parade him around while publicly dismissing Harper as the family failure. Then, the groom looked at her. The salt-heavy breeze coming off the Atlantic did nothing to cool the suffocating atmosphere inside the Kiowa Island Ocean Course clubhouse. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the mahogany tables, illuminating the elite of South Carolina's high society. Politicians, corporate tycoons, and wealthy socialites mingled, their laughter ringing out over the soft melodies of a live string quartet. Standing near the heavy oak doors, Harper Davies adjusted the collar of her simple navy blue dress. She felt like an alien on her own home planet. Just 72 hours ago, she had been breathing in the alkaline dust of a forward operating base in the Syrian desert, the concussive thump of outgoing artillery rattling her teeth. Now, she was supposed to smile and sip champagne as if the world was nothing more than country clubs and stock portfolios. Harper was 28. But her eyes held the exhaustion of a woman twice her age. She was a covert operative for the United States Army's Intelligence Support Activity, a Tier 1 Special Missions unit that officially did not exist. Her world was comprised of close target reconnaissance, gathering human intelligence in the most dangerous, unstable regions on Earth to pave the way for Delta Force and SEAL Team 6 operations. But to her parents, Richard and Beverly Davies, she was simply the family's greatest disappointment. Harper, really, that dress? The sharp, clipped voice cut through the ambient noise of the room. Harper turned to see her mother, Beverly, marching toward her. Beverly was draped in an emerald green gown that likely cost more than Harper's annual base pay. Her blonde hair was perfectly coiffed, her expression pinched in perpetual disapproval. "Hello, Mother. It's nice to see you too," Harper said, keeping her voice level. Beverly waved a manicured hand, her diamond rings catching the light. "You could have at least visited a salon. Look at your hair. It's completely fried. And where is your makeup? Tonight is about your sister. The least you could do is make an effort to look like you belong here." "I had a long flight," Harper replied quietly. She couldn't exactly explain that her hair was dry from the rotor wash of a Black Hawk helicopter, or that the faint, jagged scar peeking out from her collarbone was from a piece of shrapnel she took during an ambush in Mogadishu. Her cover story, the one her family believed, was that she was a mid-level logistics coordinator for the Department of Defense, a desk jockey who pushed papers in a dusty warehouse. To a family of Ivy League lawyers and corporate executives, dropping out of Georgetown University to enlist in the Army was an unforgivable sin. "Well, try to blend in," Beverly sighed, aggressively smoothing the shoulder of Harper's dress. "Chloe's fiancé's family is here. The Gallaghers are practically military royalty. Generational Annapolis graduates. Jonathan is a Navy captain, a SEAL. He's already in line for an Admiral star," Richard says. "Please, Harper, don't bore his family with stories about your inventory spreadsheets or whatever it is you do." "I'll stick to the weather," Harper said dryly. Before Beverly could launch another critique, Richard Davies approached. Tall, silver-haired, and exuding the kind of arrogance that only decades of corporate litigation could buy, he handed his wife a glass of champagne. He looked at Harper with the same expression he reserved for an opposing counsel's junior paralegal. "You made it," Richard said, offering a stiff, obligatory hug. "I was beginning to think you'd miss your sister's engagement just to make a point." "I wouldn't miss it, Dad. Congratulations to you both. It looks like a beautiful event." "It is," Richard said, his chest puffing out slightly. "Chloe has outdone herself. And Jonathan, well, you'll see. He's a remarkable man, an alpha male, a true leader. It's comforting to know Chloe will be taken care of by someone of his caliber." He paused, his gaze drifting over Harper's unadorned wrists and simple heels. "Maybe you could ask him for some career advice. A man like that knows how to climb the ranks. Might help you get out of that dead-end clerical track you've been stuck in." Harper bit the inside of her cheek. "I'll keep that in mind. Just try to stay out of the photographs tonight, sweetheart," Richard added casually, as if delivering a harmless weather update. "The photographer is doing a spread for Charleston Society magazine, and we want to keep the aesthetic cohesive." With that, her parents turned and glided back into the sea of wealthy guests, leaving Harper standing alone near the coat check. She took a slow, deep breath, centering herself. In the field, she was a ghost. She had tracked high-value targets through the mountains of Afghanistan and negotiated with warlords in the Horn of Africa. She could survive a cocktail party in South Carolina. Retreating to the shadows of the room, Harper found a quiet spot near the secondary bar. She ordered a neat bourbon and leaned against the oak paneling, watching the room. The double doors at the top of the grand staircase opened, and a hush fell over the crowd. The string quartet shifted smoothly into a more triumphant, romantic piece. There she was, Chloe Davies. Chloe was undeniably beautiful. She wore a stunning, custom-fitted ivory gown that hugged her figure perfectly, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders in flawless, expensive waves. She was a highly successful luxury real estate broker, the absolute apple of her parents' eyes, and someone who had never experienced a single day of physical or emotional discomfort in her life. And walking down the stairs beside her, holding her hand, was Captain Jonathan Gallagher. Even from across the massive ballroom, Harper could feel the sheer gravitational pull of the man her sister was marrying. Captain Jonathan Gallagher was imposing. He stood well over 6 feet, with broad, heavily muscled shoulders that seemed to strain against the fabric of his meticulously tailored midnight blue tuxedo. He wore a miniature gold seal trident pinned discreetly to his lapel, the only outward concession to his lethal profession. His face was ruggedly handsome, etched with the kind of hard-won lines that only years of command under fire could carve. He had piercing, analytical eyes that were currently sweeping the room, not with the polite curiosity of a groom-to-be, but with the tactical assessment of an apex predator determining exits, threats, and sightlines. Harper recognized the look instantly. It was the gaze of a man who had lived in the dark corners of the world. As the couple reached the floor of the ballroom, the crowd erupted into applause. Chloe beamed, soaking up the attention like a sponge, waving to her socialite friends, and dragging Jonathan through the crowd to make introductions. Jonathan smiled politely, shaking hands, but Harper could see the slight rigidity in his jaw. He was enduring this. The pomp and circumstance of high society was a completely different battlefield and clearly not his favorite one. Harper remained in her dark corner, nursing her bourbon. She had no intention of interrupting her sister's grand parade. Over the next hour, she listened passively as distant relatives and family friends approached the bar, often speaking in hushed, pitying tones when they noticed her. "Oh, Harper, dear. Still in the army?" her Aunt Diane asked, looking at Harper with a mixture of sympathy and mild disgust. "It's so brave of you to do. Whatever it is you do. But surely you must be thinking of settling down soon? Look at Chloe. She has everything." "I'm happy for her, Aunt Diane," Harper replied mechanically. "Of course you are. But, it's not too late for you to go back to school. Richard told me you're still working in supply management. There's no shame in admitting you made a mistake dropping out." Harper just smiled and took another sip of her drink. Let them think what they wanted. The cover story was essential. If any of these people knew that a classified dossier bearing her cryptonym had recently been on the desk of the Secretary of Defense, their heads would spin. But the isolation was heavy tonight. The contrast between her reality and their perception was a chasm she could never cross. At exactly 8 o'clock, the clinking of a silver spoon against crystal cut through the low roar of conversation. Richard Davies stood at the head table, a microphone in his hand, his face flushed with expensive wine and immense pride. "Ladies and gentlemen, family, and distinguished guests," Richard began, his booming voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate the union of two extraordinary families, and, more importantly, to celebrate my beautiful daughter, Chloe, and her fiancé, Captain Jonathan Gallagher." Rapturous applause followed. Chloe smiled coyly, resting her head against Jonathan's massive shoulder. Jonathan offered a humble, tight-lipped smile. When Chloe was a little girl, Richard continued, pacing slightly, commanding the room like a courtroom. "I always knew she was destined for greatness. She has always been the light of this family. Driven, successful, radiant, She took the gifts she was given and built an empire in real estate. She represents the very best of the Davies name. Richard paused, and his eyes scanned the room, briefly landing on Harper in the back before flickering away. Now, as a father, you have different hopes for all your children, Richard said, his tone adopting a patronizing, philosophical edge. We all walk different paths. Some of us take the world by storm. Some of us are leaders, carving out our legacies with ambition and grace. And some, he chuckled, a condescending sound that made Harper's stomach tighten. Some of us take a little longer to find our footing. Some of us are content to just follow orders, to stay out of the spotlight, to struggle a bit while figuring life out. And as a family, we love our little failures just as much as our grand successes. It builds character. A smattering of uncomfortable laughter rippled through the crowd. Beverly nodded approvingly. Chloe looked down, feigning modesty, but a smug smile played on her lips. Harper felt the heat rise in her cheeks. The disrespect was palpable. To be called our little failure in front of 200 people in front of her sister's new, highly decorated military family was a calculated, cruel humiliation. It was Richard's way of establishing the hierarchy, of proving that Chloe's match was the ultimate victory, while Harper was just the cautionary tale. Harper stared down at the ice in her glass. "Let it go," she told herself. "You're a ghost. Act like one." Richard raised his glass high. "But tonight is about excellence. It is about leadership. Captain Gallagher, you have served this nation with the highest distinction. You are a warrior, a commander, a man of unparalleled achievement. We are profoundly honored to welcome you into our family." To Chloe and Jonathan. "To Chloe and Jonathan!" the room echoed, glasses raising in unison. Richard handed the microphone to Jonathan. The SEAL captain stepped forward. The room went dead silent. He didn't just command respect, he demanded it by his sheer presence. "Thank you, Richard," Jonathan said. His voice was a deep, gravelly baritone that carried effortlessly across the massive room without him needing to raise it. "And thank you to Beverly, and to all of you for welcoming my family tonight. Chloe is an incredible woman, and I am a lucky man." He spoke with the measured, deliberate cadence of a man used to giving briefings in war rooms. "Richard talked about leadership and excellence," Jonathan continued, his eyes scanning the crowd. "In my line of work, you learn very quickly that true excellence doesn't usually happen in the spotlight. True leadership isn't about the awards on your chest, or the money in your bank account, or the speeches people make about you at parties." He began to pace slowly, his sharp eyes moving over the sea of faces. "In the teams, we know that the real heroes are the ones operating in the shadows. The ones who do the dirty, agonizing, impossible work, knowing they will never get a parade, never get a medal, and never get public recognition. We owe our lives to the quiet professionals." Jonathan's eyes swept past the wealthy socialites, past Aunt Diane, past Richard and Beverly. And then his gaze stopped. He froze. Mid-sentence, the eloquent, composed Captain Jonathan Gallagher stopped speaking. The microphone lowered slightly in his hand. His posture changed instantly. The relaxed, polite groom vanished, replaced by an operator whose brain was rapidly processing a high-voltage shock of recognition. Harper, standing 50 feet away by the bar, froze too. She hadn't looked closely at his face until this very second. The jawline, the eyes. "Oh my God," Harper thought, the blood draining from her face. It had been 3 years. The Korengal Valley, a classified JSOC extraction under zero illumination conditions. A SEAL team had been pinned down by 300 Taliban fighters. The activity Harper's unit had been the only friendly element within 50 miles. Harper had personally commandeered a local warlord's technical, driven straight into the kill zone under heavy RPG fire, and coordinated the close air support that broke the ambush. She had dragged a bleeding SEAL commander into the back of her truck while taking fire. She had packed his shoulder wound, tied a tourniquet with her own hands in the pitch black, and kept him awake until the medevac birds arrived. She had been wearing a helmet, night vision goggles, and a face wrap coated in mud and blood. But he had looked her dead in the eyes when she shoved him onto the helicopter. He had never known her real name, only her call sign, Valkyrie. Jonathan stood absolutely motionless on the stage. The silence in the ballroom stretched from dramatic to confusing, and then to painfully awkward. Chloe tugged gently on his sleeve, whispering something, but Jonathan didn't feel it. His eyes were locked dead onto the woman standing in the shadows by the bar. The woman in the simple navy dress. The woman Richard Davies had just publicly mocked as the family's little failure. Jonathan slowly lowered the microphone entirely. He stepped away from the podium. He stepped away from Chloe. And then, with the entire ballroom of high society watching in bewildered silence, Captain Jonathan Gallagher began to walk straight toward Harper. The ballroom of the Kiowa Island Ocean Course Clubhouse descended into an eerie, suffocating silence. The string quartet had abruptly stopped playing, the cellist's bow hovering awkwardly in midair. 200 of South Carolina's wealthiest elites watched in absolute bewilderment as Captain Jonathan Gallagher, the decorated Navy SEAL and groom-to-be, strode with lethal purpose across the polished hardwood floor. He moved with the predatory grace of a man accustomed to clearing hostile compounds, his eyes locked dead onto the woman standing in the shadows by the secondary bar. Harper's heart hammered against her ribs, but years of Tier 1 operative training kept her physical exterior perfectly still. Her mind raced through protocols. Deny, deflect, maintain the cover. She was intelligence support activity. Her identity was classified above top secret, compartmentalized under special access programs. But as Jonathan closed the distance, the intense, unwavering recognition in his steel-gray eyes told her that plausible deniability was rapidly evaporating. Richard Davies, suddenly realizing the groom was ignoring his radiant fiancée, jogged forward, his expensive dress shoes clicking frantically against the floor. "Jonathan, my boy, what are you doing?" Richard laughed nervously, a sound entirely devoid of genuine humor. He reached out to clasp the SEAL's shoulder. "The photographer is waiting by the ice sculpture. Come, let's get back to Chloe." Jonathan didn't even break his stride. He shifted his weight imperceptibly, effectively brushing off Richard's hand as if swatting away a minor insect. He bypassed the corporate lawyer entirely, leaving Richard standing foolishly in the center of the room. Jonathan stopped exactly 3 feet in front of Harper. Up close, the sheer size of the man was intimidating. The gold trident on his lapel caught the dim light of the bar. For a long, agonizing moment, he just looked at her. He studied the slope of her jaw, the defensive posture of her shoulders, and the calculating, guarded look in her dark eyes. "Coringal Valley," Jonathan said. His voice was low, but in the dead silence of the ballroom, it carried like a gunshot. "October 14th, 3 years ago." Harper gripped her bourbon glass tighter. "Captain Gallagher, I believe you have me confused with someone else. I work in logistics. Fort Belvoir." A faint, humorless smile touched the corner of Jonathan's mouth. "Logistics. Right. You're telling me a logistics coordinator was driving a bullet-riddled Toyota Hilux through a Taliban kill zone? Because I remember a woman pulling me out of a collapsed mud compound while we were taking heavy PKM machine gun fire." Gasps rippled through the nearest cluster of guests. Beverly Davies dropped her champagne flute. The crystal shattered against the floor. But nobody moved. "Jonathan, please," Chloe hissed, finally catching up to him, her face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and rising fury. She grabbed his arm, her manicured nails digging into his tuxedo jacket. "What are you talking about? She's just Harper." She pushes papers. "You're ruining the speech." Jonathan gently but firmly removed Chloe's hand from his arm. He didn't look at her. His focus remained entirely on the woman in the navy blue dress. "My team, DevGru Gold Squadron, was compromised," Jonathan continued, his voice tightening with the memory of the blood and the dust. "We had 2 KIA. I had a 7.62 millimeters round through my left shoulder. Comms were jammed. We were completely blacked out and surrounded by 300 fighters. The quick reaction force was grounded due to weather. We were dead. We knew we were dead." He took a half step closer to Harper. "And then, a rogue technical smashes through the perimeter wall. 1 operator inside. You dragged me into the bed of that truck. tied a tourniquet tight enough to bruise bone, and called in a danger-close airstrike from an AC. 130 gunship that leveled the mountainside. Jonathan paused, his voice trembling with a fierce, suppressed emotion. You didn't have any unit patches. You didn't have a name. Just a call sign on the radio. He stood at strict attention. His chest expanded, and the relaxed groom vanished entirely. "You're Valkyrie," Jonathan stated, stripping away the final layer of her cover. Harper closed her eyes for a fraction of a second. The ghost was burned. She opened them, her posture shifting from a slouching civilian to the rigid, squared-off stance of an elite soldier. She looked back at him, the exhaustion fading from her eyes, replaced by the hardened steel of a professional killer. "You talk too much, Captain," Harper said softly. "I owe you my life," Jonathan replied. Slowly, deliberately, in front of the entire assembly of South Carolina high society, Captain Jonathan Gallagher raised his right hand and rendered a crisp, perfect military salute. It was the ultimate sign of respect. A Tier 1 commander saluting a woman her own father had just publicly branded a failure. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a suffocating vacuum. "This is insane!" Richard bellowed, his face turning a dangerous shade of magenta. The public humiliation of his narrative being shattered was too much to bear. "Jonathan, this is a psychotic delusion. My daughter failed out of Georgetown. She is a low-level supply clerk. She is a disappointment who can't even dress properly for her sister's engagement." Jonathan dropped his salute. He turned his head slowly to look at his future father-in-law. The look in the SEAL's eyes was so terrifyingly cold that Richard actually took a physical step backward. "Mr. Davies," Jonathan said, his voice dropping an octave, radiating lethal intent. "The woman you just called a failure is a Tier 1 covert operative for the United States Army's intelligence support activity. She is part of the most elite, highly classified unit in the Department of Defense. She operates in the dark so that men like me can survive. She has more courage, more honor, and more strategic value to this country in her little finger than everyone in this room combined." The truth hit the room like a concussive blast. Aunt Diane pressed a hand to her chest, looking like she might faint. The wealthy corporate tycoons, who just minutes ago had been looking at Harper with thinly veiled pity, now stared at her with a mixture of shock and profound awe. "No!" Chloe shrieked, her perfect, composed veneer completely shattering. She stomped her foot, her ivory gown swirling angrily. "No! This is my night. You are not making this about her. She always ruins everything. Tell them you're joking, Jonathan. Tell them right now." Jonathan looked at Chloe. For the first time all evening, he really looked at her. He saw the petulant, selfish fury in her eyes. He saw the way she looked at her own sister, not with pride, not with shock, but with absolute venom, because the spotlight had shifted. "She saved my life, Chloe," Jonathan said quietly, testing her. "I wouldn't be standing here. I wouldn't be marrying you if it weren't for her." "I don't care." Chloe spat, tears of rage streaking her expensive makeup. "She's a liar. She lied to us for years. She's a freak." Jonathan's expression hardened into granite. The analytical gears in his head, the ones that assessed threats and determined character under fire, clicked firmly into place. He looked from Chloe to Richard, who was still fuming, to Beverly, who looked thoroughly embarrassed by the entire ordeal. "You know," Jonathan said, his voice carrying a sudden, heavy exhaustion. "In the teams, we evaluate a man's character by how he treats those he believes are beneath him. I thought I was marrying into a family of leaders. But you aren't leaders. You're just arrogant." He reached into his tuxedo jacket and unclipped the miniature gold seal trident from his lapel. He didn't take off the ring, they weren't married yet, but the symbolic gesture of removing his warfare pin spoke volumes. "Jonathan, what are you doing?" Richard demanded, panic finally piercing through his anger. The Gallagher family connections, the Admiral's star, the societal prestige, it was all suddenly slipping through his fingers. Before Jonathan could answer, a sharp, repetitive buzzing vibrated from Harper's small evening clutch. It wasn't a standard ringtone, it was a rapid, dual-tone pulse. Harper's demeanor instantly shifted. The drama of the ballroom vanished from her mind. She unclasped her bag and pulled out a heavy, encrypted satellite device. She checked the screen. A single string of alphanumeric code flashed in red. Code: Blackbird. Immediate recall. JSOC command. Her leave was cancelled. Something had gone catastrophically wrong somewhere in the world, and the activity was being mobilized. Harper looked up, her face a mask of absolute professionalism. She looked at her parents, who were staring at her as if she were a stranger. And in truth, she was. She had been for years. "I have to go," Harper said, her voice devoid of any familial warmth. "My unit is wheels up in 2 hours." "Harper, you can't just leave!" Beverly cried out, torn between anger and a sudden desperate need to understand the daughter she had entirely misjudged. "We need to talk about this. You owe us an explanation." "I don't owe you anything, Mother," Harper replied, her tone chillingly flat. "I've spent my entire adult life listening to you tell me I was a failure because I didn't want to sell luxury condos or defend corporate tax evasion. I let you believe it because my job requires it. But I am done apologizing for the silence." She turned to her sister, who was sobbing into her hands. "Congratulations on the engagement, Chloe. Truly." Finally, Harper turned to Jonathan. The SEAL captain stood tall, his eyes reflecting absolute solidarity. "Captain Gallagher," Harper said, offering a curt nod, "keep your head down out there." "You too, Valkyrie," Jonathan replied softly. Harper turned on her heel and walked toward the heavy oak doors of the ballroom. The crowd of elites parted for her instantly, stumbling backward to clear a path as if she were made of fire. The little failure marched through the sea of wealth and superficiality with the terrifying, unyielding presence of a warrior going to war. As the heavy doors swung shut behind her, plunging her back into the humid South Carolina night, Jonathan Gallagher turned back to the Davies family. He looked at the shattered remains of their perfect society event. "I think," Jonathan said, stepping away from the altar of their arrogance, "we need to have a very long conversation about this wedding." Outside, the roar of an approaching black SUV cut through the sound of the ocean, ready to take Harper Davies back to the shadows where she truly belonged. If you loved this story of hidden strength, shocking reveals, and ultimate payback, drop a like right now. Hit that share button to send this jaw-dropping drama to your friends, and don't forget to subscribe for more intense, real-life inspired stories. What would you have done in Harper's shoes? Let me know in the comments below.